administrator for the AMG MICP. I'm also the focal point for AMG violations and audits, but today we're going to focus on the MICP. And my treat for you today is that I only have a few slides. The slides are intended to be a brief introduction to what I'm going to show you in FMSuite as far as how we manage the MICP now. Once I get into that presentation, I'm not going to provide a whole lot of detail on how you input information and what my opinion is on the content of the information that has been provided. It's just going to be an overview just to show you what the program is capable of doing. This will be kind of a supplement. I think I heard that Captain Wright has not covered this topic yet, so it'll supplement the information that he'll provide you in the lesson when he goes over the MICP. So the terms and things that he's using, you'll be able to actually have a visual idea of what that really is. I've managed this program now for 5 years, and it's been under construction since then. I don't know what was happening with the program before then, but each year something different has happened. This year, the difference is we're using FMSuite, and there are going to be some things that I'll go over that'll be slightly different than what's in your book, and that doesn't mean the information in the book is incorrect. It's just, it's different. It's managed in a different way now, and so you may see some differences there. Okay, so we're going to go over a brief description of the MICP. I'm not going to go into much detail. You'll do that when you cover that lesson. We'll talk about how we manage the MICP in FMSuite now versus what we've done in the past. In the past, it was all paper, and it was just very difficult to manage that way. FMSuite makes it easier. And after a little bit of discussion there, we'll go into FMSuite itself, and I'll do a demonstration to show you some of the things that we do with MICP and FMSuite. Okay, so a description of the program itself. It is a commander's program, so, and that's all commanders, so not just your FM controllers, it's every commander. We're talking mission support group, ops group, all of those commanders should be involved in this program. FM manages the program, so it's a very difficult program to manage in that those commanders outside of FM think that it's an FM program, therefore they shouldn't have to provide any input to it, but that's not the case. According to Public Law 97-255, that's your FMFIA, the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act. That act says that we will have an internal control program. We're going to establish internal controls, evaluate those internal controls, and that establishment and evaluation of controls should be on an ongoing basis. So if you know anything about this program, a lot of the wings or personnel will wait until the last minute to put together a report, and they think they're done with the program. It's actually ongoing. It's something that you should be looking at every day. And one of the other things that the Act requires is that we submit an annual report each year. So for us in ANG, it's around April for the wings, and then the MAJCOM submit a report, the statement of assurance to SAF-FM, and that report discussed the status of the internal controls. And as far as information for the MICP, again, if you've had any involvement in this program whatsoever, a lot of people think that this program is a duplication of some of the other programs that are out there, and it really isn't. Actually, the MICP, I would say, is kind of the overarching program for internal controls. It's been out there for a long time. It's just kind of been ignored, and we've included some of these other programs, the fire program, the quality assurance, MICP, even just what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. All of that information that you get via those other programs and what you're doing daily feeds into this program to meet the requirements per the Act. So FMSuite to manage the MICP. We began using FMSuite as a result of an Air Force Audit Agency audit. I think it was back in 2009, 2010 or so. Air Force Audit Agency came in and audited the Air Force program. And based on the fact, they realized that Navy had already automated their MICP. So after looking at the Air Force program, they recommended in that audit report that Air Force also automate. It took a little while for it to happen, and SAF-FM looked at the Navy's program. The Navy's program didn't work out, so they ended up settling for the FMSuite as far as managing this program. So this year is the very first year that all of the MAJCOMs have had to use FMSuite. While FMSuite is good, I think, there are still some things that need to be changed to make this program better. Okay, so what FMSuite does for us. You've probably talked a lot about auditability and transparency. This program is a step in that direction as well. As far as transparency, if someone has access to FMSuite at the staff level, they're able to see everything that everybody is doing with this program just with a click of a button from the very top right in their seats. As far as auditability, it makes it a whole lot better because we don't have pieces of paper floating all over the place and things getting lost. This system actually is going to be a collection of all of the information that's ever input for MICP, so we'll be able to go back several years. I'm not sure how many years worth of data is going to be maintained in this system at this point, but so 14 is going to be in there for a while, so if I'm in 16 and I want to go back and see what a particular wing did in 14, I'll be able to do that with just a click of a button. I don't have to reach out to any wing to see what it is, they did if I lost my documentation. It improves efficiency. So once upon a time, every year you had to do the same thing over and over again. This program allows you to put, say, evaluations for key functions into the system, and rather than re-inputting that information or re-accomplishing some sort of a spreadsheet, or whatever the case might be, the information will roll from one year to the next. So information that the wings have put in for FY14 can be moved into FY15 with a click of a button, and then they'll just have to update dates and maybe remove some things that are no longer applicable to the current year. Information can roll from the bottom to the top, which is the way the program should work. So we'll talk a little bit about accessible units in a little while, but if, say, ComFlight inputs information about whatever ComFlight is doing with their internal controls, Mission Support Group is able to see that information. Mission Support Group Commander can go in and import anything that Mission Support Group Commander thinks is important, and that information will roll all the way up in that sort of a way until it reaches SAF-FM. And SAF is pretty much where this program ends. DOB is not involved. So when SAF-FM gets their information from the MAJCOMs through the system, they then have to pull it out and gather it all together the way that we've done it in the past, which is, paper version, transferring stuff in that way rather than doing it in FMSuite. This program forces standardization. So SAF-FM always comes up with their guidance, and they tell us exactly how they want the reports written, and it is very clear, the format, what should be in the particular blocks of information that are required for the report. And my experience is that people pretty much ignore those templates in some cases, and they do whatever they feel like doing. Well, FMSuite requires you to use a particular template. It is set up so that the information that SAF-FM wants, you have absolutely got to put information in those blocks so that when the report is written, it looks exactly as SAF-FM requires it. And it makes it a whole lot easier for myself in the end, because I have to gather all of this information and provide it to SAF-FM. If it's in the correct format, it just makes it a whole lot easier for me to submit and then for SAF-FM to submit to DOB. Okay, contains reports that were once created manually. So in order to, when it's time for the wings to submit their information to me, there are many reports that I have to spreadsheets that I have to put together in order to track, who's completed their statement of assurance, who's not completed their statement of assurance, who has material weaknesses or deficiencies, what type of deficiencies they have, is it material or is it not, and I have to keep track of all of that information manually. Well, FMSuite gives me the opportunity to look at some of those things in a report that I can create easily just by using FMSuite, so that I don't have to create all of these spreadsheets in order to make it happen. Okay, so those are some of the things that FMSuite does. Some of the things that FMSuite doesn't ensure, and this is the case with most things, is the information that goes into the system is only as good as the person that puts that information in. So FMSuite doesn't ensure that the information that's inputted accurate or complete. That's up to the individuals who are putting that information in the system. What we're hoping is that by having FMSuite now, it makes it a little bit easier, maybe maybe just a little bit easier for people to input their information over the course of the year rather than waiting until the last minute, and maybe then the information will be more accurate and complete. But right now, that has been an issue. Data input, it doesn't ensure that data input is well supported. So there are evaluations that have to be done on internal controls. The support for those evaluations must be out there somewhere. It's not a requirement right now for that information to go in FMSuite. So if somebody says that they looked at their weapons and all of the weapons are good, they should have some documentation somewhere that supports that information. But based on an audit that A&G had done on the MICP recently, that wasn't the case. Some of the evaluations that were done were not supported. So that's one of the things that we still have to work on. It doesn't ensure compliance with the MIC requirements. So while the program has templates that are set in stone pretty much here, SAP-FM can change those templates. We can't. We have to put information in there, but the information doesn't necessarily have to meet the MICP requirement. So if SAP-FM says an accomplishment is supposed to be something that you described that, say, create some sort of efficiency, something that improves an internal control, and somebody goes in there and they put in something that says, well, Sergeant so-and-so won an award for whatever. That is not what we call an accomplishment. It doesn't meet the MICP requirement. Of course, the program doesn't check that. It's my job to read through the information that's provided by the links and make sure that the information that's input into FMSuite meets the MICP requirement. It doesn't ensure that commanders are well informed prior to signing the annual report. Because this is a commander's program and internal controls are ultimately the responsibility of every commander, the commanders actually sign the statement of assurances or the statements of assurance. And in some cases, what they're signing is not necessarily really good information, in my opinion. And part of that is because the individuals, the FM personnel, the other wing commanders that are inputted, not wing commanders, but the group and squadron commanders that are providing information, have to understand that they're providing this information that the commander will eventually sign and is responsible for, so they should provide really good information versus just throwing something together. And sometimes the commanders, trusting that we're providing them with good information, they just sign, and what they're signing may not necessarily be an accurate picture of what their internal controls look like for a particular year. And so because of these issues that we continue to have with its program and the information that's input for it, AFAA is at us again. They're in the planning stages of a follow-up audit on the MICP compliance. So they're going to look at now, based on what we were doing before paper version, now they're going to look at what we're doing in FMSuite and see if any of the problems that we've had in the past have been corrected by using FMSuite. In my opinion, some of the issues have been cleared up, but we still have a way to go as far as making this a really good program. Okay, now we'll go to the demonstration. I'll open up FMSuite so that you're able to see how we manage it and manage the program in this system. Now, the only problem that I have as far as doing that is we're not open yet for FY15 because there's a duplication issue that we have with the system, so the programmers are working on correcting some things within FMSuite before they open us up for 15. So there are some things that I won't be able to show you, and that shouldn't be a problem because I'm not showing you inputs and things like that. So I'll just go through the reports that I already have, information that was provided to FY14, to show you what we've done so far. Okay, now I'm going to you have to fill out a 2875 to get access to this. I don't know if any of you have access, but if you're a subject matter expert or if you're an administrator, if you're helping your commander gather information for the statements, you would be given access via the 2875. I only have access to MICP because that's pretty much my job. I don't have access to the MORDs or the ODL or any of that other information that's in FMSuite at this point. But looking at this screen here, we'll start at this point. So this is some of the information that I can see that makes my life a whole lot easier as far as, creating spreadsheets and things to keep track of what's going on. So first of all, when we are given access to this thing, it's blank. The information that you see here, it's not there. We had to build all of this information in. So ANG being one of the larger MAJCOMs, we have, not counting ANG itself, there are 98 accessible units, and I'll explain what an accessible unit is once I get to that point. But just looking at this screen right here, new this year, we all had to do a risk assessment. Each accessible unit had to do a risk assessment. I can see the status of that risk assessment. I can see when the risk assessment was done. There are different levels of risk. You have low, medium, and high. I can see that status, and of course, I don't know if all of the answers were completely accurate as far as answering those questions for the risk assessment, but it appears we're low all the way down. Completion status is very important for me, just because I have to meet a deadline to SAF-FM, so if any of my wings are late, that kind of forces us at ANG to be late submitting a SAF-FM. So I can very easily, rather than tracking manually, I can easily go down here and see who's complete, who's signed. And don't worry about that late reporting. A lot of that is using the new system, and once the wings thought that they were done, they hadn't accomplished something in there, and I reviewed it. If something was incorrect, I'd undo it. And if I undid it after the deadline was met, then they show late reporting. So a lot of these were reopened so that we could meet the requirement of the program and have this as complete as possible. One of the main things that has to be submitted in the statements of assurance are accomplishments, and those accomplishments along the lines of efficiencies, things that are done within the wings that make internal controls better. So you can see here, I can see the number of accomplishments. Of course, that number doesn't tell me too much until I actually get into those reports and look at what they're providing as accomplishments, because we're looking for accomplishments that provide some sort of efficiency that makes things better, and many of these accomplishments probably wouldn't meet that criteria, because we're still working on providing good accomplishments that will eventually go into the statement of assurance that goes up to DOD and Congress. So in the regulation 65201, and probably in your books there, the focus is on material weaknesses, but really there are 3 levels of deficiencies. You have control deficiencies, which are very minor things that can be taken care of at the wings, but they're still reported because they are issues that have to be corrected. You have reportable conditions, which are a little bit more serious. Maybe there are several deficiencies in a particular area that need to be corrected, so that's there. And then the material weaknesses are those deficiencies that have to be reported outside of the wing, because the wings are, when they report material weaknesses and up to us, they're stating that they need MAJCOM assistance in correcting those problems. Okay, and then going to the reports, the statement of assurance itself, I'm not going to start there. I'm going to go with the AU report browser, which is the accessible unit report browser. It takes a little while for it to open up because there are so many, and hopefully it'll open. Okay, so here I can see the breakdown of our accessible unit, and what an accessible unit is, it's a segment of an organization. We're supposed to break down for us. So we break down ANG into accessible units. An accessible unit is a manageable piece of ANG, and we have kind of agreed on breaking down our accessible units by group. And then within the group, if there's a lot of difference, such as with MSG, we break that down further. So an accessible unit with the MSG is an accessible unit. It's a big one. It's a higher level one. And then we have CES, FSS, LRS. Those are all accessible units. Each one of those accessible units has to fulfill all of the requirements for the statement of assurance and the management control plan. So whatever has to be submitted, each one of these submitted. And off to the right, if I wanted to look at the 175th SSS statement of assurance, I can open it up and see what information they've submitted. In the past, I wouldn't have that information. I would just get the wing report and that's it. I wouldn't be able to look at any of the information that was provided from the accessible units that actually fed into that wing report. So I have more visibility, and not just I, but SAF-FM has access to all of this, so they can also dig all the way down into the wings and be able to see what each of the accessible units are providing. So, and each of these are broken down in that sort of a way. And each MAJCOM is going to be different because SAF-FM kind of leaves it open for us to decide how we want to manage our own programs. So if you have access to MICT, to FMSuite for this purpose, your breakdown may be different than ours. So Harrisburg is a really big one, and they actually have a couple of GSUs, so they have much further, a deeper breakdown here on more accessible units that they are responsible for. So overall, I think we have close to 700 total statements that are submitted because of the breakdown that we have and the requirement for each accessible unit to provide a report. And I'm going to go into, let's see, I'm going to change this for a second, and I'm going to open up a statement of assurance so that you can see what it looks like. And from where I am right here, I can actually get into the wings statement. So I'm going into Harrisburg as though I were sitting at Harrisburg so that I can show you their statement of assurance. There were some errors in this program where it wouldn't open up properly. This is the only way I can get to it. And that is giving me an error. Okay, and I think trying to open that up, that has kicked me out because I can't see FMSuite anymore. So give me a second to go back into it. Okay, so can you see the statement of assurance for Harrisburg?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of the information that's in the statement of assurance, we once upon a time had to type all of this information in because there are a lot of canned statements, like the internal control objectives. It just pretty much talks about the objectives of the program itself, and you have reasonable assurance that you're protecting your assets against fraud, waste, and abuse, that sort of thing. Those are just canned statements that we once had to type over and over again every time we did a report. Now that information is in here so that every report looks the same and it's kind of automatic. So each of the lanes have screens that they go into to provide information. The unique information that they're providing will be added to this report, but all of the canned statements, like the first 3, 4 so paragraphs, it's kind of automatic. So when I look at this, I can see that they have supporting documentation. So at that particular wing, they completed statements for 8 accessible units, and they had input from 13 subordinates. And the subordinates are just, as you break down your wing, it either counts as an accessible unit, as a primary one, or a subordinate. This information, the control testing activities, is just talking about those areas that are being evaluated, and I won't go into that at the moment. But I can easily look at these reports and see if they had any internal control deficiencies, whether or not they're brand new or something that they've had in the past. So this is just a summary, and then in a different report, I can go and actually look at what those deficiencies are. And as you can see down here, we and A&G are a little bit unique in that we have state involved as well. So while most accessible units will have one signature, we have three. So we have the commander. The commander of the 193rd will sign this thing, and the certification is the important statement that is in your book there, and it just is the commander is saying that he has reasonable assurance that internal controls are in place and they're working good. And when we talk reasonable assurance, we're saying that for the most part we're sure that we're protecting our assets and we're not going to have any fraudulent behavior going on, although we know that there is a chance that something could happen, and we're not going for 100% because it's too costly to go for 100% assurance on anything. We also have our USPFOs, the United States Property and Fiscal Officers, sign these statements, as well as the Adjutant General. So we get three signatures in all of our wings, where most of the MAJCOMs will have just one signature. But each of them are attesting to the completeness of their internal controls across the board for that particular wing. So and see here we have accomplishments. The accomplishments again are set up in a particular format. There is a spot where you can go to put this information in to provide up the chain of command. And I'm not going to go into any of those in any detail, and that is pretty much what the statement of assurance is. And once upon a time we had lots more information in these statements, but SAF-FM has narrowed this down so that the bare minimal information that's required is what we submit. Now let's see if I can close this thing out without shutting the whole thing down. Okay, and then going on to, the program requires two things. It requires the statement of assurance, which has to be signed by the commander, and you also have the management control plan. The management control plan addresses your internal control standards, deficiencies, and it has a summary of the evaluations done on those internal controls. So when you get to this lesson, you're going to talk about the standards. I'm not going to go into them in any detail because you'll do that. I'll just quickly go through them to kind of tell you what they are. But there are 5 standards, and each of the wings has to address these 5 standards. They have to discuss how they're using these standards in order to establish their internal controls. So the control environment is pretty much tone from the top. What type of involvement does management have in the program? If management has more involvement in the program is likely to be a lot better than if management were not involved. Risk assessment, something that we're doing new for the first time. While doing a risk assessment has always been a requirement, Air Force had not enforced it. So this year is the first time that all of Air Force, all of the accessible units had to do a risk assessment. And here we're just talking about your internal and external risk, things that might prevent you from accomplishing the mission. You have control activities. That's anything that you do. That's your locks on the doors, your access, limited access to certain systems, checking your weapons. All of those sorts of things are considered control testing activities. Information and communication, how we share information. That's up, down, and sideways when necessary. Monitoring, something that should be done on an ongoing basis, because this program is not a 1 week a year type of thing. Monitoring the internal controls has to happen on an ongoing basis, so that needs to be addressed there. And here, once upon a time we had a huge spreadsheet that included all of the key programs and functions and who is responsible for them and when those key functions were evaluated. Now it's limited information that we include in the system here. So as you can see, looking at this, well, I'm going to relate this back to fire. Fire has a much greater focus. Fire's focus is the budgetary information and the mission critical assets. For the internal control program, as far as key functions and programs, it's very broad. So it's whatever the commander thinks is necessary to meet the mission. Those are the things that they're supposed to be listing in their management control plan, and they evaluate those things as necessary or per the regulation, and they have to report that information for the internal control program. Now, of course, that information information is also maintained in other places, so it doesn't have to be done a second time. It's just a matter of reporting it back once a year in FMSuite. So here we're looking at flying training. You can see who's responsible for it. This is something new that was added to this since we started using this program. So you have a planned start and planned end date, so they should be deciding for flying training, how often am I going to look at it. If it's 4 times a year, then they would put this into FMSuite 4 times. They would have 4 lines of information for flying training, and then when they actually complete that evaluation, they have to put that date in here. Now, that's all that I see as a date, so I think that they're covered. But when I go out and start checking around and I ask for information, if they can't provide a document that supports the fact that they looked at their flying training on 31 December of 2013, that's a write-up. And whether I do it or whether the auditors do it, it's a write-up, because they're supposed to maintain the supporting documentation somewhere. Like that, it's not required to be maintained here, because SFM doesn't want to have you maintain information in MICP and then turn around and also maintain it in MICP. So it's pretty much up to the wing to decide where they want to maintain that supporting documentation, but it is very important that they maintain it because it's audited. So this particular wing has a lot of evaluations going on here. In some cases, they have some evaluations that are planned. And I'm not sure, I don't think this is one of the wings that has any deficiencies, so I'll probably have to open up a different one. And here I can, in the past, it was kind of difficult for me to know who they had assigned as accessible unit managers and accessible unit administrators. So your accessible unit manager is pretty much a commander. It should be a commander. The Army says, I believe it is like 06 and above. We don't have guidance that is specific for the Air Force, but that's kind of the direction that we're going. It should be Division Support Group Commander, the Ops Group Commander. It should not be a chief or a senior master sergeant, which is what was happening in the past. So the accessible unit managers should all be commander types. And then the commanders, having a whole lot of other stuff to do, can assign an accessible unit administrator to assist them in pulling together all of the information for the wing in order to complete these statements. So that's these people over here. And in some cases, it can be the same person. So you see Kimber Connolly, who is the comptroller for the 193rd, is also the administrator for her wing commander, Colonel Dickerson. Okay, so they had some control deficiencies and some reportable conditions. Because the control deficiencies and reportable conditions are kind of lower level deficiencies that can be managed within the wing, it just kind of lists a title here, so I don't see any information that has a description of exactly what that is in this screen, and it's not necessary because the wing should be taking care of those on their own. Now I'm going to try to find one in here that has material weaknesses so that I can show you that. Go with Camp Murray. And as you can see, this is another management control plan, and it's really nice because it's all in the same format, same type of information, same order, so it makes it a lot easier for me when I have to pull all of this information together. So we have 98 wings that submit, and my job is to review 98 reports and create one for the Air National Guard. So here we have an uncorrected material weakness, and this one is an example of one that is not necessarily a weakness. What they're saying in this particular instance is that they're looking for an anti-terrorism officer. So the regulation is very clear in that a lack of personnel and financial circumstances doesn't necessarily meet the requirement of what is a material weakness, but in some cases we're still submitting that sort of stuff. So that's what, this is not the best example of what a material weakness is, but as you can see, the format there is a requirement. In order for me to submit something up to SAFFM for them to assist us in correcting a problem, it has to be in this format. They have to provide title and description. They have to state who identified this as an issue, whether it be identified in a report or identified by an individual or identified during an IG inspection. Doesn't matter, that information has to be in here. They have milestones. When you have a material weakness, the other types of deficiencies, of course, you're going to have some milestones too, because you have to work toward correcting the problem. But for material weaknesses, it's definitely most important to have a corrective action plan. So that's what their information is here, because this is not one of the better reported material weaknesses. The information is not that great, but anytime there is a deficiency, you have to have a plan to correct that issue. And this program helps us in another way with these material weaknesses. Once a material weakness is reported, it can't just be dropped. It can't just kind of disappear. You've absolutely got to do something with it and provide and maintain justification for closing it out. So, because you can't, once you input a material weakness in here, you can't go in and just kind of delete it and make it go away. You've actually got to follow through with some sort of corrective action plan, so that if somebody's going into audit and they look at a particular material weakness, they should be able to see when that material weakness was input, when it was corrected. There should be some justification in there for having closed out a material weakness, and it can only be closed out when it's corrected, or if for some reason you deem it no longer a material weakness for whatever the reason might be. But the idea is that you have some support. And again, that support is not required to go into FMSuite, but it should be maintained somewhere. And that's pretty much it. So they have a number of those. Let's see. Okay, we still have a couple minutes here, so I can show you a few of the other screens that we have in here that feed the information into those two reports. Those two reports down there are definitely your two important ones. So all of the information that's input throughout the year or at the time of submission for these reports feeds into these reports. So you can see, you click on internal control standards there, and this is where those 5 standards are. So they input this information in here, and which, whatever information they want to provide, and that information automatically feeds into the management control plan. Whereas in the past, they were creating reports over and over and over again. And you can't see down at the bottom, but once they open up FY15, they can pretty much just import this information into the next year, and then change words as necessary, because a lot of this information, as far as what they're doing to establish their internal controls and maintain them, it's going to remain constant from one year to the next. So once good information is put in here, it doesn't have to be recreated over and over again as we've done in the past.
Senior White, we've got a question from Ms. Johnson real quick.
Yes.
It's not so much a question that I'm not sure but when we're inputting, I did this past year, and I've been doing it even when it was on paper for quite a few years. And while I think FMSuite is definitely better, and I think we're going in the right direction, like when we were inputting the standards, I'm at the MSG level. So when I was trying to type in all the squadron information into these 5 standards, it tells you how many characters are remaining. If I went over a couple and I went to save it, so then I could go back and look and change some of that, it doesn't save any of that information. And there's no error saying, you went over those characters, it's not going to, it would not save any of that. So, we didn't know that because there was no error, so I saved it, thought I was going to go back into it, and there was nothing there. So, do you know if they're correcting that? And then the other issue I had at the MSG level was when the squadrons are putting the information in, when it got up to my level, I noticed some of them hadn't had their completion date. I had that information, but I could not put it in for them. The only way it could be put in is if we sent it back to the squadron commander had to unclick his portion of it, send it back to the POC, then they had to fix it and send it to the squadron commander to click it again, and then it had to come back up to me. And when you only have a 2-week suspense to do this, that's really time consuming when we we had the 2875 to get done and everything done in 2 weeks. You know,
Okay, and see, and that's part of the problem is that suspense. Because it's a program that you're supposed to be inputting information for throughout the year, that 2 weeks shouldn't be an issue because you should already have information. The majority of the information should already be input into the system or input into some sort of a report so that when it's time for the information to be submitted, you're pretty much done. You're just kind of, tying up some loose ends, but for the most part, it should be done. It shouldn't be just, well, I know the due date is April 30th, so I'm going to start working on it on April 15th, and that's what some of the wings are doing. So by inputting the information over time should correct that issue that you're having with, a 2-week suspense, and there are things that have to go back and forth. As far as the back and forth is concerned, it's set up that way in FMSuite on purpose because what they want is for the accessible unit to input information, close that information out, and then allow you to use the information in whatever way you see fit, but not change the information that your commander put in. So you shouldn't have the ability to go into what the mission support group commander put in and that you go in and you change what they've put in there, because then you run into the problem where the group commander might say, if something is submitted incorrectly, well, I didn't do this. And there is an audit trail in here, so you can see who inputs what, but it's set up so that someone at the next higher level can't change the information that was input below. So I can't go in and change the information that the wings put in once they lock it out. I can change it for my own report, for the report that I do for A&G, but I can't change the information that will be seen in the system for that particular wing. Right. And that's on purpose.
Yeah, and I get some of that. It was just like completion dates and stuff like that.
Yeah, you won't be able to make those changes, and I don't think they're going to give you that access because the idea is that you don't change what your commander's input. Otherwise, like for material weaknesses, what was identified in a couple of the audits that were done, a group would submit a material weakness, but the wing didn't feel like it was a material weakness, so the wing would just drop it and do nothing with it. Well, we can't do that. If a group submits a material weakness, the wing absolutely has to address it. They can downgrade it to a lower level, but they can't just delete it and pretend that it doesn't exist. And if you were given the ability to go in there and change what your group commanders put in, that's exactly the thing that would happen. And because of issues that were identified in audits, that feature is put into the system on purpose. Now, the character issue is probably something that we can change, but I think SAFFM is trying to limit the amount of information because they don't want you to say for control environment to provide a 3-page story on your control environment. While you might have a whole lot going on there, they want you to provide just the basic information. And I guess I can suggest for next time, I'm not sure if you would A&G or not, but what I can suggest for the next time probably is that you type this stuff up as we did in a Word document and then paste the stuff into FMSuite so that you don't lose information because, yeah, you will lose information because this system right now, at least it doesn't give you an error message to tell you you've gone over and you might lose something.
Yeah, and we do this program all year long. It was just they didn't go to FMSuite on our base until right before the MICP was done. So that's the reason we didn't have it to put in that system until that 2 weeks. But we do it all year long, just so you knew that. I mean, it was just we didn't get access to the MICP program.
Okay, well hopefully this upcoming year it'll work out a little bit better. I know a lot of our wings are trying to get this thing open as soon as possible because they're ready to input information, which is really cool for me because it just works out better if the information is put in over the year and the quality of it will just be a whole lot better. But I'm hoping that this is going to be opened up real soon so that people can start inputting information. I'm thinking that if it's available to someone and they're sitting behind the desk and they have an accomplishment, they would just, even if it's in December, they would just go ahead and type it in so that they're done with it. They're not trying to remember that particular accomplishment when the due date approaches in April. So it'll be better. And there are lots of changes that are being implemented. I wouldn't have time to go into all of those, but whoever your MAJCOM PLC is for this program has had an opportunity, has actually a slide presentation that shows all the things that are being taken into consideration to make this a little bit better for all of us.
Oh, good. That's good to know. I'll just contact them. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have the risk assessment. The risk assessment relates back to those 5 standards. So as you can see, it's all about those 5 standards. There are individual questions for each. So control environment has a number of questions. I'm not going to go into those questions. You have the risk activities down at the bottom. Then after you answer all of those questions, you can provide an overall assessment of your internal controls. And the way that you answer these questions over here on the right-hand side determines whether or not you have high, moderate, low, moderate, or high risk. And for the most part, I'm sure people were kind of playing it safe and choosing those options that would give them low risk, because I guess we could be just that good, but I'm kind of thinking that there is probably some risk out there that may be more than low across the board. So and this is something new, and they can always change these questions to make it whatever they need it to be. And this is done on accessible unit in the past, as the Army does it on their programs, which I think works out better, because you could have, within a particular accessible unit, you could have five programs with very, very high risk and only one that's low risk. But if you do this assessment on the accessible unit itself rather than the program, you might not capture that. But for now, this is the way we're working it. So accomplishments, and this is where the templates come in. You can't really see it right here, but I can't show you that because we're locked out. But there is an option on the screen when you get into this where you can add an accomplishment, and it would have the particular format that SASFM requires, and you just load that information in there. And this, at each level, gives the commander the ability. So, say ComFlight puts in an accomplishment, but then when it gets to mission support group commander doesn't like that accomplishment. They don't have to approve it and have it show up in the mission support group statement of assurance. So while this system allows me to see everything that everybody put in, that information is not necessarily going to end up in the final reports as they move upward, because the commanders have options to include or not include, but they can't delete the information. So they can negotiate with their commanders and have the commanders delete it, but at the higher levels, we can't just get rid of it. So where the X's are those accomplishments that weren't accepted at the wing level. So where the check marks are, those accomplishments would have gone into the report, and I would be able to see it. So when I get the wing report. Same thing here with deficiencies. There would be an option to add deficiencies, whatever those deficiencies might be. We have the deficiency type. Again, there are 3 types of deficiencies, so they would choose that particular deficiency. I really don't like seeing these material weakness ones just because a lot of them are not really material weaknesses, and the material weaknesses definitely require a whole lot of extra coordination. So anytime I have a material weakness, it has to go through the applicable director. The director has to provide feedback to tell me whether or not they believe it is in fact a material weakness. If it is, then we submit it further. If not, then we downgrade it. But when material weaknesses, when the deficiencies are not classified correctly, it can create a lot of unnecessary extra work. And that, and as far as the report is concerned, if I open up this deficiencies, it's an ugly report right now, but if you can see where I am, the deficiencies report right here, where it was kind of difficult for me to see all of the deficiencies, the content of them as a whole. If I open up this spreadsheet, I guess I can open it. This one should be small enough, but this particular spreadsheet it provides all of the information. Let me move it over. It provides all of the information that's in every deficiency that wing provided. There's some duplication here that SASFM is working on correcting. Every time it's imported from one level to the next, it repeats that deficiency, so it's not as many as it appears. But I can actually look at this spreadsheet and I can see exactly what was submitted. I can sort it so that I can look at just reportable conditions or just material weaknesses. And once upon a time, I had to create this spreadsheet myself. So my focus was material weakness and not necessarily worry about all the other stuff. But now I can see it all. Okay, and that is pretty much it. As I said, I can't, even if I wanted to, go into detail as far as input and things like that, but that's pretty much it. And this is, if you've done this in the past on paper version and the amount of content that was once included, you would be able to, you would understand that this makes it probably a whole lot better than it has been in the past. And I'm hoping that some of those corrections are made to the system to make it even better for future years. But